Same day as Taylor Swift.
Ah, lucky you.
Not only that, same year, too.
Yeah.
We're literally birthday twins.
Hello and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plot, structure, character, and dialogue. Be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else, we'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley
And John William Worth.
And this is Story Weavers. All right, guys, we are back with another episode of Story Weavers. John, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good, hanging in there. How are you?
I'm phenomenal. Today, we're going to be talking about video games.
Woo!
Some of the good stuff about video games, some of the not so good stuff about video games. So let's just get right into it.
So this first thing that I thought of, one of many questions, was the fact that video games are probably like the newest sizable art form, at least at this time of recording.
Just in terms of how many people partake,
how many people play it, and how many are knowledgeable of it. Like if you ask anyone, it's like they not only probably know a video game, but they've seen it. If not, they've played one. Like of all ages,
right?
And it's just like with its sizable audience and reputation, it's like how have video games impacted? How have they changed or impacted society?
Well, there's so many different avenues you could go down with that.
Like I said, it's a huge question.
Yeah, I mean, everything from how it's affected kids growing up, how it's affected. I mean, even just like the medical industry. I assume a whole
VR.
lot of like technology that came from video games was implemented in the coding, and everything has been implemented into the medical field, tech fields. Basically, there's so much data that can be found from video games that can then be used as like rewards-based programs. I mean, there's so many different things.
I mean, like, I just think of like my dad's former company, aircraft manufacturer and defense contractor. And it's like, I know that like the idea of VR headsets were around before video games, but they were strictly science fiction, strictly unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden it's like Nintendo came out with their really, really crappy headset back in the 80s, but it planted the idea in people's heads. It's like, hey, you can actually do this.
Oh yeah,
and then you get Pokemon Go doing augmented reality, AR, and it's like...
Yeah, they managed to take video games outside.
Exactly, which was unbelievable. Yeah. But it's like, it also
in ways other than a Game Boy that forced...
Right, but it also got through to like these, the powerful people, the wealthy people, the ones we hate. And they realized like, oh wait, first of all, there's money in this industry. Secondly, this can be used for other things.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why, like how you said, like, because like I said, that question was very broad. It depends on age group, background, nationality, all this stuff. But there are 2 points I would like to bring up concerning all those different avenues. The first is that video games actually... I remember reading this thing after, you got all the senators and Congress people saying how horrible video games were and they were promoting violence and all that. They actually diminished violent tendencies in kids because they did like some kind of survey over like a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. And they said playing violent video games actually makes kids calmer and actually... See, because it's like they take out it's like going to the gym to lift weights around. It's like playing a video game. As horrible as it sounds, it's like you take your rage out in the game in a harmless way, or you focus on something, problem solving, puzzle skills, which is the same for, hand-eye coordination. Yeah. Video games teach that.
Yeah. It's interesting though, and I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here because in the last 10 or 15 years, I think, there was a study that was done, I think it was with University of Iowa students, and they had, it was male students mainly. Because they were looking for aggression. Yeah.
Yes.
And so they had two groups of students. I didn't read the study in detail. I kind of read an overview. But they had two groups of students, and one group of students they had play Wolfenstein, and the other group of students they had play Myst, which is like fantasy RPG.
Yep.
And then shortly after that, there was some sort of collaborative activity. I don't know what it was, but if someone did something wrong, the students had the ability to like, quote, punish someone by like playing a loud sound. And the group that had just been playing Wolfenstein consistently played or used the sound more, louder, and for longer.
Oh, okay.
So it's just interesting. Now, mind you, the study you looked at may have been on kids, whereas this one, is late
Fully grown,
teens,
mature people.
early adults. So yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that the violence in video games can do, though, and obviously the person playing it has to put it into the context themselves, but a lot of times it can show the reality of some of like the nastier sides of humanity, like war. You look at the old like Medal of Honor games,
Call of Duty, and the older Call of Duties that were more down to earth. They
storming Normandy and parachuting, into London and stuff like that.
Yep. It was, while they might have been historically inaccurate in some parts, they were no more inaccurate than a lot of movies. And they put you in the shoes. And that actually leads into the second thing I want to say, besides the possibly lowering of violent tendencies and, the improvement of hand-eye coordination, and just video games brought people from different nationalities and all across the world together in a way that other mediums cannot. Because especially multiplayer, it's like, I clearly remember in college, my roommate had an Xbox 360 and Halo 3. And it's like, he had friends over in France. He had friends in the Middle East. He had friends over in different parts of Asia. So it's like, and all these people were chatting together, and just, it's one of those things that when you think about
it's a like, community.
Exactly. And it's a massive community, because it doesn't matter your interests. You're already in the same game. You've already proven like, hey, you're already into the same thing. And it's like, it gave people the ability to learn about other cultures, quite just like how you said, in the game, but also quite literally, because you might be talking to someone in Germany and you'll learn about Germany. Maybe you'll go visit them. Maybe you'll hang out outside of the game. It's like this, such an interesting thing. And I just find it so funny that for so long people condemned it. But then when you look back,
but there is a darker side too, though. I mean, there are a lot of people that will get on those games and just like trash talk and demean and bully and all of that stuff. I mean, and teabag, yeah.
Oh yes.
I mean, there definitely is a darker side, but it is interesting. Like, is it the video games that really brought that out in them, or? Was it the environment of the video game? Was it the environment of the game and the people on that game they were playing? Was it how they were raised and how they choose to react to certain situations? I mean, there's so many different factors to talk about.
It's the whole nature versus nurture argument, which, is enough for an entire video or an entire series of episodes. Just to make it clear, like, I'm a firm believer that it's a combination of the two, but it's more nature oftentimes. Like, people, like, some people are
I think the opposite.
You think
I think it is a combination, and people genetically are definitely susceptible some way, but I think environment plays such a huge role. There have been a lot of advancements in like brain study lately that are showing that like the brain is elastic and the brain adapts, and it does a lot of that in your first like 2 or 3 years. Makes a huge difference in how your brain forms and makes connections with the environment. And if you're, that age and, you're maybe in a household with a lot of yelling and people fighting or, abuse or whatever it is, I think that something like that is more traumatic and will affect your brain chemistry going forward almost more than your genes. Your genes, obviously, I mean, there definitely is something to that. But people also people always thought for the longest time that people can't change and the way they were born was how they are. And we all know that's not true now.
Exactly. Just one point.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. It's like, I always go with the science. So like, if it's proven otherwise, yes, of course, but, like, at least my reasoning for why I think it's nature plays a slightly more a larger role to nurture, because I like to look at like the more anomalous, I guess is the word, side of things, because those would be the individuals you deal with when, like, you know, the unfortunately mass shooters or predators or such, the people who would actually be influenced by video games or books or movies. They're the ones who would be easily influenced. And it's what you usually see is an already established tendency or mindset towards such an activity. Like, I always remember this comic I read called My Friend Dahmer, which was about Jeffrey Dahmer as a teenager. And it's a wonderful graphic novel. It was a true story. It's written by one of his former friends. And all through the comic, you see Jeffrey Dahmer was almost self-aware, at least to the author's perspective. And he was already violent. He already displayed the trifecta of violent behavior. And it's, even if he had had the happiest home life, he would have still been a violent person, but maybe not. But he had parents on the verge of divorce, very dismissive, neglective, and his school life was bully and very traumatic. So it's like, it certainly didn't help the matter, but his nature was already there. So no, I definitely agree with that. The nature was there, but it was a lot of times it was the environment around them that, you know, maybe push that over the edge. Yeah, exactly. Right. Which is the argument I would go with, like, for violent video games. It's like all those controversies that we always heard about in the news, they were the 1 in a million. And you also have to look at, it's like, yes, they played Doom. Yes, they played Quake, but those weren't the only factors. They couldn't have been, and I'm a firm believer they weren't.
People were saying that Slipknot, like, made people violent.
Marilyn Manson.
Yeah, well, Marilyn Manson I don't want to talk about, because Marilyn Manson actually does have a lot of shit coming out about him right now. We'll probably talk about this in another episode. But Marilyn Manson is one of the artists where, like, I can't listen to his music anymore with all the stuff that's come out. It just
perfect. So yeah, Marilyn Manson, you're saying he's the one artist that you can't listen to, and I completely understand, because when I was first starting in college, I wasn't a huge fan, but I liked some of his music, and then I started hearing some of the stuff coming out, and it was like, no. But I used to love me some Manson. His first album, I love it. Big fan. Right. But it's like I can't. I have a hard time listening to it now, though. No, I understand, but it's like the one quote I always remember is from Bowling for Columbine, which, you know, Michael Moore has his own interesting personality, but it's like he was interviewing Marilyn Manson, and Marilyn Manson just said, you know, it wasn't just that the kids listened to my music or played a violent video game. There were other things, you know, because that would be the same thing, like at the turn of the century, claiming that, oh, well, seeing these horrible stories in the newspaper, it's going to inspire other people to murder or rape. And it's like, now you tell that to people, it's like, oh, that's ridiculous. And it's like, but that's what you're claiming. That's what you're saying.
We just want to take a moment to remind you all of our book of the month for December 2023. This month, we're reading Dalton Trumbo's Johnny Got His Gun, a 1939 anti-war novel set in the thoughts of a soldier who was injured on the battlefields of Europe in World War I. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it so far, and I'm really enjoying it and looking forward to when I get a few minutes here and there to pick it up and to keep reading. One of the things we did want to point out is that Dalton Trumbo also directed a film of the same name based on that book, about 30 years after it was originally published. So if you're not too keen on reading, go ahead and check out the movie Johnny Got His Gun, directed by Dalton Trumbo, as that will be a topic of discussion as well in the episode coming out at the end of this month. Now back to the episode.
But no, like, so I think it's pretty safe to say that neither of us really think that any of the violent video game controversies held any water.
Not really, at least not to the extent and the weight that some people were giving them. You know, I can see it a little bit, and I could see how if, you know, someone is spending most of their waking hours exclusively, you know, playing those games and being excited about, like, the actions they're actually doing in the game, and not just, like, you know, playing Halo with their friends and, like, oh, look, I killed you. Like, just, you know, having fun. That's no different than going and, like, playing laser tag.
Exactly. Or like Manhunt, the famous murder simulator game. It's like, If you're in it for the story, that's one thing. If you're in it for, I'm going to cut their throat, that's a completely other thing.
Yeah.
And plus, like how you said, like spending every waking moment. I mean, we're talking about children in this case and teenagers. It's like it's going to affect their grades and their social life too.
Yeah.
And problem-solving skills.
But it's like with anything though. There's, just be reasonable.
Right.
Because, I love Oreos, but I don't eat 5 Oreos a day.
I do.
Every day?
Some days I only do 3.
Okay. Some days I only do 3 also.
This is why I go to the gym 6 days a week. But no, like the whole thing, like how I was saying earlier about how kids, now video games, like this is undeniable. They improve like motor skills and hand-eye coordination and all and depth perception and all of this stuff. It's like, but spending too much time at that can damage your eyes, damage your social skills, damage perception or like, screw with your anxiety level. So it's like there's a fine line between what's too much, or not really maybe even fine, but there's a line between too much and okay, Oh,
yeah, yeah. Well, and the other thing I think that video games can have sort of a negative effect on, and I speak this from personal experience, is, games are designed, a lot of games are designed to make you want to keep playing.
The serotonin boost.
Yes, the serotonin boost, and especially in the advent of today with mobile gaming and microtransaction and all of this stuff, it can give people a false sense of achievement.
Yeah, I mean,
you go through and you're playing a game and it's like, oh, just a little bit more to get to the next level, and then I can unlock this thing, and then I just do a little bit more and do this, and there is some truth to that, and in real life, and, if you're trying to accomplish something and you fail, you try it again. But when the only thing you're trying to accomplish is the video game,
right. It has to have real world. It has to have real world applications, like a lot of puzzle games. It's like, it's almost like when someone with dementia or like, does puzzles or does word searches, it promotes brain development and keeping your mind sharp. Same with puzzle games. But there's a possibility of overdoing it and you become soaked up into the world of the game and you don't want to do anything physical. You don't want to move. I mean, look at South Park.
I've been there. I was like that with WoW back in the day.
I was about to say World of Warcraft. It's like my roommate in college, he stayed, maybe cut his name. My roommate in college, it's like he spent hours and hours and hours and hours on World of Warcraft, and he also had the worst temper. Like, he broke his laptop, he threw his mouse, and to me, it was like all the time he was spending on the computer, like, and playing a video game. It's like, that's one, I used to have a horrible temper too. But I've learned, like, step away. Walk away from it. Like, it's a video game.
Well, and the difference too, at least in my experience with WoW, for WoW, a lot of people, I mean, it's an MMO. It's a massively multiplayer online game. It's designed to be played with other people. And there were times that I played with other people, but then I went years and I didn't play with anyone. I just played by myself, and I definitely like completely just like got sucked in to the game. And then eventually, like, thankfully, life caught up with me, and I got to a point where I realized I had to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very invested in a video game. I'll play it for a few weeks on end, or I finish it, and then I'll step away from my PlayStation or Switch or whatever console or game I have for maybe months at a time. And it's like, I'll think about it, but that at least as an adult, I'm kind of like, I don't quite have the time to do it. It's not as accessible as picking up a book or popping in a TV show, because it's like every time I say, like, as fast as the PS5 is, I'm just going to go play 10 minutes. 2 hours later, I look up, it's like, oh crap.
Well, part of my issue too is just like, for me with a book, it's a lot easier to pick up a book, and if I kind of forget what's going on, you leaf through a couple pages and go, oh yeah, that's what happened last.
Yes.
But a lot of times with video games, if I only ever pick them up on the weekends, I'll pick it up and I won't remember what the controls are for the game or what I was trying to do, what my goal was. And so, like, half the time I've got so many unfinished games for that reason, because I started playing them, enjoyed them, would put them down because I had other things I had to do. And then I come back and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I don't feel like playing that 6 hours all over again. So I'll find something else.
And maybe this is just a natural part of aging because all of us, you listeners and us both here, are going through this amazing thing called life. And as we age, we start to see like how we change. And maybe this is just natural progression.
I've definitely become more self-aware.
You become more self-aware, and it's like when you're a kid, it's like, yeah, sinking 6 hours into a video game, so what? Yeah, so the video game is kind of my life. So now it's like you're realizing, like how I said before, it's just a video game.
You start to feel guilty almost.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel guilty about stepping away from the game.
Well, no, not stepping away. I'm like, when you're playing a game for that longer, you realize you've put all this time into a game. Like you look in the last week, and you're like, well, what did I do after work? Played all these games. Like, that's great. You calm down or whatever. But sometimes I feel guilty if I play games for too long, and maybe that's my own problem. I have to deal with.
I feel that way when the game hasn't been very good. And I guess that it's the same way like watching a bad movie or reading a bad book. It's like no one wants to waste their time on something that they're going to close and be done with and say, that sucked. So it's like Ghost of Tsushima, Witcher 3, was it Castlevania Symphony of the Night? All the games that I've loved, when I finished them, even as an adult, I would say that was a rewarding experience.
Right. It was worth playing.
But then, like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, you skate. The fact that I spent
but it's got such a good
hours,
soundtrack.
I know, but I could just, but it's like, that's the other thing. As a kid, I had no problem sinking dozens of hours into that game, partially because the PlayStation didn't tell me like, oh, you played this game for 50 hours. But also,
that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to blame Sony for telling me how long I played a video game for making me feel guilty about it.
Blame Sony and Microsoft for everything. But now it's like, it's the self-awareness, basically. Like you can separate the fact that the sense of achievement. It's like there's so much more you could get that serotonin boost from other than a video game.
Though,
yes,
there is a thing that's very popular these days, and something that I'm kind of a follower of, but I don't interact a whole lot.
As long as it's not a cult.
But no, like live streaming on Twitch. Like,
oh yeah.
Like I vividly remember being a kid with POD like in my CD player playing Super Mario Sunshine and thinking like, man, how cool would it be to make money just playing video games?
Yes. No,
it's something I've thought about doing a lot in the last few years, but I don't want to invest the time into it.
When I was younger, when I was like a wee lad, it's like, I remember thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to make money doing this other than, the programming aspect and stuff? Mm-hmm. I remember my parents and everyone around me said it's their video games. That's the dumbest idea. And now it's like a multi-million-dollar industry for each individual.
It's huge.
It's a lot of work, but it's that's one of the reasons video games have blown up as much as they've had. It's because they're so lucrative now.
Oh yeah. Well, Twitch, I don't pay for cable anymore. I've got a couple streaming services like most people do nowadays.
You can replace live TV.
I also just
live.
I go on Twitch and I have a few streamers I like. It's, that's the channel I want to watch, and if I missed it, most of them have them up on YouTube and I can go back watch them.
That's exactly what I do.
And that's a lot of times what I do if I can't if I don't want to invest the time playing through a game, I'll pull up a streamer's channel, throw it on in the background and pay attention while I'm, working on something else. And I get to experience the game without maybe feeling like I spent a whole lot of time doing it.
I do the same.
For me, sometimes I need.
I do the same thing. Sometimes I watch playthroughs, not playthroughs, but walkthroughs even, just watching someone play the game. And again, for a game like Bloodborne, where it's like, I suck at Soulsborne games, so I don't even try, but it's like, I'm so intrigued by them, so I watch them. Or how I said about like the YouTubers, like Call Me Kevin, RT Games, Vanos, KYR Speedy. It's like, they're all YouTubers and Twitch streamers, but I watch their YouTube channels, and it sounded ridiculous when I first thought of it, because I realized like years ago, like, I'm not watching as much TV, movies. I have to be truly interested. I don't just watch a movie now. It's because those kinds of things have replaced television for me to an extent, because like how you were talking about Twitch streaming, live television, watching, the YouTube videos, they could be an hour, maybe 2 hours long sometimes. That's a TV show. That could be a movie, and it's entertaining.
Yeah, right. And if you don't like it, you find another one.
Exactly. And it's having, I would almost compare it, it's having the same effect that streaming, like Netflix and stuff, had against cable. Because as we can now see, all those streaming services are starting to become cable. The prices are going up. Whereas this, it's like, it's all free. And I mean, that goes...
But the difference is like a lot of those streaming services, like you don't have ads. You know, TV stations all made their money from ad revenue.
Right.
And most of the streaming services nowadays don't have ads. You know, you can pay $10 to not have ads on. Yeah, you can pay $10 to not have ads on YouTube. You can subscribe to someone's channel on Twitch, you know, and watch their streams ad free. So, I mean,
or cut this part, get ad block.
Right. But it's just like, you know, but that's also a way that it has changed the industry. Advertising is different.
Yes. And it's recognizing that, hey, it's almost like having all those ads on the sides of like racetracks where it's like, there's your advertising, but it's there. It doesn't need to be in your face. You're literally advertising a video game from a huge company, a huge publisher. There's your ad right there. It's a walking, talking, living ad sometimes.
Right. For them. But not all of the other companies that we normally see ads for, like Coke or Budweiser or
By Tide.
Whatever else.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like that would be, I would compare Twitch and like live streaming to almost, I'd be tempted to say that could be one of the next streaming killers, or not killers, but a contributor to pushing them like, hey, you need to be better. You can't go down the route the cable is because here's the alternative.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I was going to say maybe you start seeing more independent people that are independent or small companies making their own channels, but that's what they're doing on Twitch. Or if they make a small, make a short film or a small low budget TV series or something like that. Like now it's which streaming network do you get it put on, you know?
Right.
Because it's going to be hard to compete with something like Netflix or HBO just with their huge catalog.
Part of it, like the size of video games now, and especially since they've now been a part of such big historical moments. Now, they're not just some background noise that, oh, your kid's playing Mario, your kid's playing Duck Hunt and like getting angry they can't kill the dog. It's like, you know, I mean, Pokemon Go. Everyone I know was aware of Pokemon Go. And it's like, I remember the feeling of the sense of community and togetherness the first 5 or 6 days when that game came out.
I have friends, more than one member of my band still plays Pokemon Go daily and has since the day it launched.
Yes,
I mean, you might not see it in the news, but it is still like incredibly popular.
Yes. And it's like, also look at, what is it? Another recent example, the Animal Crossing game, where it's like at the beginning of COVID, once again, Nintendo released a game where it's like,
it came out in like May of 2020. Like everyone was waiting for it. It was April. Like everybody was waiting for it.
Everyone was locked inside, and life was pretty crap at that point, to say the least. But here was a game where it's like, look, we know you're all stuck inside. Here's something that can tide you over, and it's like,
go fish and visit your friends' islands.
Yes, yes. Wait till 3 a.m. so you can see the aliens on TV. I never did that, but it's like, it's just like how HBO had Game of Thrones and Showtime had Tales from the Crypt and Sopranos, right? Showtime was Sopranos? Yeah.
That was
it's
HBO.
Like and 6 Feet Under, you know, how there were all these watershed moments with streaming and TV and films. Video games have now started to become a part of history and major moments, like, you know, at the beginning of COVID, Animal Crossing came out. Once again, going into the controversy angle, also for bad things, Doom came out, and you know, and the Mortal Kombat and all that.
What was wrong with Doom?
Violence.
I see the point you're making now. Yes,
that was the game. It was either that or Quake. Was the game that the Columbine killers played almost obsessively when before the shooting, and so they tried to pin the blame on Doom.
Yeah,
and it's like it's like there could be a bunch of contributing factors. Video games have now become such a critical thing in our society.
Yeah,
you know, just so important, comparable to Game of Thrones, to in terms of impact, like maybe Lord of the Rings, some could rival Harry Potter, some could, the cultural knowledge and awareness and impact.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's not to say that what those kids did at Columbine wasn't like
not at all. It's
atrocious. It was horrible. It was horrible.
But it's like it's just like how.
But I'm not going to blame Doom for it.
Exactly. It's like it goes back to the conversation we had earlier. But also, it's just like how you could say books influence people, movies influence people. It's influential. It's a piece of media.
Yep.
It's like the creator wanted to create this. It was their vision. They didn't set out saying, I want to make a video game that inspires murder. No,
right.
no one does that. And if they do, absolute shame on them.
Call them out.
I've never heard of anyone who has done that. It's like, We'd like to take a brief moment to thank you for listening to Story Weavers. For the enjoyment of our listeners, we want to keep this podcast ad-free and uninterrupted.
If you would like to support us further, check out our options on Patreon. Plus, subscribing will get you behind-the-scenes content, bloopers, access to Book of the Month polls, and more. We appreciate any and all support.
Now back to the episode. And then the last thing that I would ask, and this is a nice little capper. Well, it's a two-parter. Where would you like to see the video game industry go from here?
Honestly, I really want to see more focus on indie development. And there is a lot of it out there, and there are a lot of amazing indie games, and especially like with Steam now, aside from some of the console-specific titles like Mario or Zelda or whatever, the vast majority of games nowadays can all be played on a computer.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cross-platform. Independent games are typically much more inexpensive for the buyer. And a lot of times the communities for them are a lot tighter and get a lot more excited about it, because many times it's teams of, I mean, it was like Team Cherry that did Hollow Knight was like 2 people, I think. I mean, it's crazy. And I have a game like that. I mean, that's one of the best games I've ever played. 2D, Metroidvania, gorgeous graphics, incredible gameplay, incredible sense of progression, hard as hell. And it was like 2 people made it. And I have so much more respect for those 2 people than I do for some of these larger AAA titles. Not that they're bad. I love some of the big AAA titles, but when you get to
like
those,
you
have
film versus a studio film sometimes.
Well, right. Well, and you get these corporate companies, are creating this game and they just want to get the most money they can out of it. Whereas so many of the independent game makers and game designers, they're doing it for fun.
Yes.
And they put it out there and hope that people like it. And sure, plenty of them are doing it for money as well. But when you're the one that has kind of like sole discretion over how you're creating the game, I would love to, I mean, it's already there. There's still a lot of it. There's still going to be great AAA games.
You want to see it continue.
I want to see it continue. I want to keep seeing indie games. One of my most frequent Google searches is, what are the new indie games that are out that I need to check out? Like I just started playing Dredge, which is an awesome Lovecraftian horror fishing simulation, and it's great. It's really cool. So it was like $20, and I probably could have gotten it on sale if I waited.
Yeah, see, that's the other thing those indie games have that the AAA titles don't. It's more affordable, too, because less staff, it's a little more curated to a particular audience, or it's a smaller game, which sometimes, once again, talking as adults, I don't sometimes have the time to sink 50, 60, 70 hours into a video game as just the plain story. So it's like sometimes I just want something like Binding of Isaac, where I could go in, do some quick dungeons, leave. It's like, okay,
I've been a big fan of roguelites and roguelites for the past few years, because you can kind of, go in, you can play for 20, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, get a couple runs in. But then once a run's over, obviously you want to keep playing, but it's easy to just be like, okay, well, I'm done, because the next time I play, I've got to start over again anyways. And I don't,
Yeah.
So I've been a big fan of the roguelike games lately.
I pretty much agree with what you said in terms of where where I would like the industry to go. And this feeds into the next part of the question that I'll answer first. But it's like, where do you realistically think the industry will go?
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see what you have to say.
I would mostly say, for once, I have the positive note. I would say it's where you said, like, indie developers and independent studios, if you will start to take over and maybe get bigger. And a lot of the AAA game studios like Activision, EA, Bethesda will start to get either too big for their britches or they'll start to have problems. You're already seeing it, in my opinion. And
they're starting to charge so much. I mean, so
$70 a pop for games like Redfall is a fine example. The game, from what I understand, is a buggy mess. And I've read stories about how maybe the developer knew that the publisher was going to screw it up, so they purposely made it so that they would never be touched again like that, which sounds so inappropriate, but phrasing.
Well, didn't Ubisoft even come out recently and say, like, the next Assassin's Creed game, they plan on, like, being able to completely finish the game in a matter of, like, 40 hours? Because people are starting to complain that games are getting too long to finish, and people that's another problem with all of these really, really long games is there are so many games out there right now, and there's so many good games out there that people want to play, but there's only so much time. And so I think a lot of the bigger studios are starting to realize, like, yes, but $70, I mean, let's be honest, it's still a similar, I mean, N64 games were $50 and $60 when they came out. Like, the price of games hasn't gone up that much.
But it's like to me, it's like, okay, I always compare it to like the minimum wage, and here's the socialist in me coming out. It's back then, like, okay, game was $40, $50, but your money went a little further. And also the game you had more probably replay value. There wasn't as much word of mouth, so you didn't get the toxicity of the internet and the actual review saying this game is horrible or this game is great.
Well,
you had to look up publications.
They also made a lot of money on, like, game guides, like printed game guides.
Toys. What was it called? The thing, like the Game Cat or something, where you could download cheat codes. Game Shark. Yeah. But it's
Game
like
Cat.
It was an animal.
That.
But
Great.
It's like now, I always think of it, it's like, okay, the federal minimum wage in the US is $7.50. You would have to work 2 full 8-hour shifts to afford one video game, and you're praying that video game is good. Also, let's not get into DLC or the fact that video games, particularly from AAA studios, but it's like the fact that you're getting these unfinished, unpolished games out the gate. And it's like, yes, like, who was it? Baldur's Gate just came out.
Yes, I want to check that out.
I'm tempted to also, because all the reviews have been good, and they said the best part about it, it's a finished, polished game. You don't need any patches right now. If you do, it's small. It doesn't break the game, unlike the game Gollum, which from what I heard is a broken mess.
Yeah.
But the reaction to Baldur's Gate, to me, was indicative of what these big studios, gaming, movie, whatever, have.
Well, it's also kind of
don't
like
expect it.
No, go ahead.
No,
finish,
their reaction was, don't expect us to work at that level. And it's like, why not? You're a multi-million, maybe billion-dollar industry, company, individual, and you're saying that you can't create a game of that level. That should be the benchmark. It should be the challenge. Instead, you're saying, well, that's too much for us. It's like, that's an inexcusable excuse.
Nintendo, with almost all the mainline Zelda games recently, they all got delayed, and while a lot of people were obviously frustrated because the hype for the games were so high,
it was to make them good.
They realized that they didn't want to put out a product, especially in the wake of games like Cyberpunk and games like No Man's Sky, which had, especially No Man's Sky, had massive overhauls.
Yes. So the way I think the industry is going to go, it's positive and cynical. I think that indie developers are going to become bigger. They're going to become more prominent and more noticeable, which is good, as long as they don't take over where the AAA space is, because the AAA space is going to start getting their knees kicked out from under them. Because, as you said, they're starting to see, like, we made games too long. We made them too expensive. We're pushing the consumer and the player too far. And it's like the idea of them. I watched some video from What Culture, which is like an Irish YouTube channel. And they were saying essentially that gaming companies are now trying to cater more towards the exclusive market, so the people who can afford video games. And it's like, that is a horrible mindset, because it's like, so instead of trying to price a game at $50 and get the majority of people, you're going to cut your market down to the few people who can do 70.
That's fine. If you want to do that, but you're going to lose
money. And it's like,
and you better hope you're putting out content that small group of people are going to keep continually enjoying, because as soon as you start putting out content that they don't like, your market's gone.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, that's my perspective.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers.
I'm terrible at exits, everyone. Everyone who knows me can tell you that. I tend for just the Irish goodbye, which isn't suitable in this case. But thank you, everyone, for giving us a listen. We hope you tune in, or come in, please don't come in, next week for Story Weavers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Story Weavers.